Hello and welcome back to game number 23 of the series Masters of the Chessboard. In this series we are going through the famous book by Richard Reti, Masters of the Chessboard, where we are going to look at each of the games in that book and Reti's analysis of these games. We're continuing to look at the games of Dr. Siegbert Tarrasch, who is the white pieces, and his opponent is Jacques Mieses, or Jacob Mieses, and interestingly, Jacob Mieses was one of 27 people who were given the Grand Master title when it was first introduced in 1950 by FIDE. FIDE never awarded the title to people posthumously. So people like Capablanca, who weren't alive at the time of that title being introduced, wouldn't have received it. But Jacob Mieses was one of 27 people who got the Grandmaster title when it was first introduced. Now in this game we see d4, e6, and then e4, d5. So we have a French defense. It started off with d4, e6. Now if we went into c4 we could be having something like the Queen's Gambit declined. We could even have a Dutch defense. But we see e4 going into the French defense. So e6 is almost a bit of an invitation for the French defense. You know, we could even have a Nimzo Indian or something, or a Bogo Indian if they play knight f3. There's quite a few different options, or could just go into a semi-Tarrasch or something. So e6 is quite a versatile move, but it does invite the French defense. So unfortunately we don't really have a d4, d5 game, because this will usually be obtained after e4, e6, d4, d5. However, this first move d4 is a indication of what's to come, as the next game we start looking at some d4 games. But here we have a French defense. Now in the previous games we have seen... Well, actually, yeah, in this game we do see knight c3. In the previous game we discussed some of the alternatives, such as knight to d2, or advancing, or even exchanging. But here we see knight to c3, and here black has quite a few options. They could bring their knight out, they could pin the knight to the king. But here they take, and we see knight takes e4 and knight to d7. And this knight takes e4. Well, this exchange here, obviously white has to take back, otherwise there'll just be a pawn down. This is the Rubinstein variation, and it's got a lot of people still play this today. It's got a bit of a mixed reputation. Some people don't like it, some people think it's perfectly fine. It's got a bit of a mixed reputation, but it is certainly playable. Now here we see knight to d7. And the idea is to try and play knight f6 to then exchange off this knight. Now if you had played knight f6 straight away, then we might see knight takes here, and g takes is often one of the potential moves, because after queen takes knight f3, black has to be quite careful about this queen, because it could get trapped. You know, after something like knight c6, c3 defending the pawn, if black just continues with some sort of quieter moves, then this queen is now trapped. And even now, knight f3, knight c6, even now there's a potential to try and just get a lot of tempos on the queen with this move. So, because you can develop very quickly with a tempo with the queen being here. You know, you could develop to here first, but bishop g5 is coming, and what black will often, in this position, if they do go for this line, spend a move playing h6 to actually stop this bishop g5 move. So that's why in this position we see knight to d7 first, knight to f3, and now knight g to f6. So now if white takes, black can take back with the knight. Now here we see bishop to d3, bishop e7. Taking here has been played previously by these same players, and it's still played a bit today. Actually, this isn't a bad variation at all. In their previous game, they got a White got a bit of an advantage because it continued with knight to f6, bishop to g5, pinning the knight, bishop to e7, unpinning, bishop takes, and now here Reti comments that White would have a potentially good continuation with something like queen d3 coming, attacking his pawn, which would make it difficult to castle. And after queen d3, White's ready to castle either side. And White's got a bit of a lead in development, bit of a space advantage. So White's got the slight edge here, although it's nothing major. So we don't see knight takes, although we have seen that in we haven't seen it in the previous game. Jacques Mieses and Tarrasch have played this in a previous game. Instead of knight takes, we see bishop to e7, castles. Now we see knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, knight f6. And now this bishop is under attack, so it pulls back to d3. And now black plays b6. And Reti comments that this is likely one of the main mistakes. The bishop on b7, b6 is played 2-3 and Chito the bishop on b7. And the bishop on b7 would be a fantastic piece. It's where the bishop wants to be, really. If black can pull this off and is able to castle, then black would have a very active bishop. However, in trying to do this, black is spending 2 moves to try and develop a piece, and they're not actually castled yet. So because of that, Tarrasch jumps in with knight e5, attempting to try and punish this weak square. So now if bishop b7, White can stop black from castling, because here the king has to move. Because if they try and block, then it just loses a pawn to knight takes c6, because you can't take back because you'd lose the exchange, which means the queen would essentially have to move. And even then, the computer actually gives knight a5 check and take. So this is easily winning for White. If black plays bishop b7, this is quite an easy win for White. So instead, black castles here, because bishop b5, if you play bishop b7, he wouldn't be able to castle, so he castles while he still has chance. And now we see the knight jumps to c6 anyway, exploiting this weak c6 square. We see queen to d6, and now queen to f3. Oh, this move order is quite important, actually. The queen to f3. If instead White took the bishop on e7, after queen takes queen f3, then black could continue with rook b8, and bishop b7 will be coming, and black's getting free. Black's position is sort of getting a bit better. However, with the queen f3 move now, defending the knight, now we see black play bishop d7, trying to attack this knight, because bishop b7 would lose to knight takes here, because the knight takes with check. So he plays bishop d7, attacking the knight, and now we see knight takes c7, queen takes e7, and bishop g5. And so we see why the queen went to f3 there, because it means that black's bishop is no longer really able to develop to the square it wants to. So here we see bishop g5, rook a to c8, and here Reti comments that h6 would have been the better move. It puts the question to the bishop and tries to remove some of the pressure on the king side. But instead we see rook to c8, rook f to e1, and now rook f to e8. And again, h6 would have been the better move, and probably that's the only real chance that black would have to play h6, because now white plays queen h3, and h6 is no longer really possible. Interestingly enough, h6 is the computer's move, but after h6, bishop takes h6, g takes h6, queen takes h6. The threat is rook e3 and the rook coming across, and the only real defense will be queen to here. And after you take this, then you're just 2 pawns up with a ruined king side. So, interestingly, the computer says that h6 is still the best option, and going for this position is black's best chance. It sort of shows just how bad black's position is. But we don't see h6. What we actually see is queen to d6. And with this move, black tries to sacrifice a pawn to try and save their position. But it doesn't work. This move is immediately losing. To put it in context, the computer actually evaluates this as plus 8.5 for white. So here we see bishop takes f6, g takes f6, and now I suspect what the black player was thinking is after queen takes h7, the king can potentially get away. However, we don't see that. We actually see queen to h6, stopping the king being able to run away, and therefore creating a bit of a mating net around the king. And this is the deadly move. It's not the immediate check, but it's the quieter move. It's creating that mating net. You don't have to constantly check. You can just play moves like this which limit the action of the king. And now the threat is rook e3 to rook g3 mate. So here we see f5, attempting to cut off the bishop. So now queen takes h7 is no longer a threat. But we see rook to e3, queen takes d3, and after c3, black resigns. Rook g3 is coming, and how do you really stop it? You'd have to play something like queen g7, in which case rook g3 would still come, queen g4, in which case rook g3 would still come, because otherwise rook g3 is mate. A potentially more accurate way to play instead of c3 would have just been to play rook g3 here, because after king h8, c3, where's this queen going? The queen's the only defender of this square, so if it moves off this diagonal, it's lost. Even if it goes to here, you've got f5, and it's just lost. The only way to defend mate is rook g8. However, that said, c3 is an immediately winning move regardless, and there's a simpler way to win, really, because there's no way to defend mate and keep the queen. So an example might be queen g7, rook g3, and now the queen is pinned to here and it's got no defense. So that's why after c3, black resigns. And it sort of shows the risk of delaying castling on the king's delaying castling. So Reti comments that the main weakness was b6 because it creates this weak c6 square, which can be exploited very quickly with knight e5, where bishop b7 is no longer possible. As if white had perhaps castled, they might have been okay. Although knight e5 could still potentially come, because it's an outpost square for the knight. It's worth noting, knight e5, this isn't actually a free pawn because of this common tactic. But yeah, it sort of shows the importance of getting your king to safety instead of leaving it in the centre for a bit too long. So there we have it. That's game number 23, I believe. And if you liked this game, please like, comment and subscribe. And the next game we will have our first actual Queen's Pawn game, which I'm actually quite excited for, even though I'm an e4 player myself. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.